Alright, in this video we're going to talk about stock issues. Now, this is one of those things that has existed for a really long time, stock issues, and it's kind of a very old school debate. Even when I was debating in the early 2000s in high school, we considered stock issues to be kind of old school in the way of thinking. But as I've gotten older, I've sort of realized what were the stock issues trying to do. And the reality is that stock issues are actually sort of a paradigm for questioning whether you have made a complete argument. And so during this time in academic debate, interscholastic debate, the affirmatives were just quest to sort of bring upon a complete argument. And the way that negatives would attack an affirmative was say, you did not make a complete argument because you have missed one of the key stock issues, therefore your argument cannot be complete. So I think that stock issues still sort of undergird a lot of debate, understandings, and kind of theories about how we go about things. And so in this video we're going to go over the stock issues and kind of explain where we might see them inside of debate, just so that, you know, this old school idea doesn't kind of wamboozle anybody if you see it in modern debate. Okay. So first we're going to start with what are they. I think it's an SHIT format, standing for solvency, harms, inherency, and topicality. Now there are some people who articulate that there is a second S at the end, and that second S stands for significance. However, I have never been able to have anyone clearly explain to me what the difference between harms and significance is. And so if anyone were to ever ask you about significance in like cross-ex or something, you can always sort of explain to them that your harms evidence, your impact evidence kind of serves as the significant sort of argumentation in order to make a complete argument. So first let's look at solvency. So this is going to be defined as an advocacy or proposal's probability to effectuate the harms or problems that are isolated in the 1AC, i.e., can the 1AC fix the things that they want to fix? Are the problems that are isolated inside of the 1AC something that can be remedied by the proposal or advocacy being proposed in the 1AC? You're going to see these most likely in one of two places. The first is in a contention identified solvency. Some affirmatives will say inherency, plan text, solvency, and they will lay out several pieces of solvency evidence inside of that solvency contention or piece of paper inside of the flow. Or you can also find solvency evidence embedded inside of advantages, because inside of advantages, it will serve as the link argument. Inside of an advantage, they have isolated inherency or uniqueness, and they have isolated a harms, i.e. their impact. And so the link argument serves as the solvency, or the ability for the aft to prevent the harms that are articulated inside of that advantage. So solvency is usually going to be in one of those two places, either in an entire piece of paper or contention identified as a solvency, or it's going to be embedded inside of an advantage and they'll never have a separate piece of paper. Both of them are valid. Both of them have their solvency in order to make a complete argument. The question is formatting, and what was their preference aesthetically or strategically in creating that sort of format. Harms, it's what bad things are going to happen if the affirmative isn't done. It's going to operate mostly as an impact argument, and you will often see this either in a contention piece of paper identified harms. Sometimes you'll hear inherency / harms, and they'll read like one inherency piece of evidence and one harms evidence, and then they will have a bunch of advantages, and inside of the advantages they will also have harms. So just because they have a contention labeled harms doesn't mean that's the only place it is. And then the other place you're going to find it is the impact portion of an advantage, i.e. it's the bad thing that's going to be prevented by the affirmative. So again, Either place is totally legitimate. It's just sort of a personal choice, team choice as to where they're going to be putting them. All right, inherency. There are a lot of different definitions out there. I will argue that inherency should be defined as a description of the status quo. It's real simplistic. It's just kind of telling you what's up right now. It operationalizes and sort of functions inside of debate the same as uniqueness arguments do. And they will be identified in one of three places. One, it will be in a contention called inherency. Two, they won't label it anything. They'll just start reading cards before the plan text, and that might be where the inherency cards are. Or it's going to be in the uniqueness portion of any sort of advantage. All of those places, you can look to find what the 1AC's description of the status quo is, and then you can kind of put pieces together to decide how those things effectuate solvency, etc. There is some nonsense that goes on with inherency. Young debaters like to try to embarrass their opponents, thinking that it will make them win. And so they will ask you for a specialized form of inherency and act like you don't know anything about debate if you can't answer these questions. So here are four of the kind of the bigger inherencies that sort of exist. The first is structural inherency. What are the current laws or government rules preventing the plan? I.e., usually these are policies that are doing the opposite of what the plan text does. Some novice might be like, what is your structural inherency to your plan? Looking for a gotcha moment, looking to kind of establish some ethos, but it really isn't anything to kind of deal with. It's not going to argumentatively become relevant later in the debate, usually. The next is gap inherency. Just sort of the current approaches just fail. Even if the government is trying to solve these problems, they don't work, and so we need something different or more in order to be able to solve the impacts that are isolated in the 1AC. Attitudinal inherency. Beliefs of policymakers just don't support the plan. Just that's their platform. That's what they've decided. They aren't going to talk about it. You got to be careful when you're answering that, if you answer that, because it will spot the negative team, elections, and politics links. And so it's something that if you don't have to answer, you shouldn't. And then there's existential inherency. There's no reason to do the plan. It's just like nobody's really considering it. There's just nobody kind of doing it. There's not a reason to do it. According to most people. It's just not on the politician's radar. And that's another example. So my suggestion would be if a young debater were to ask you, what is your structural inherency? You go, we don't have to have all sorts of inherency, but the inherency we do provide states as follows. And then if they keep pressing the issue, you're just like, listen, that is a meaningless distinction. We still have an inherency. The plan is not going to pass right now. So that's the important part. And so you should evaluate it as such. We don't have to have each type of inherency in order to win the debate. Then topicality. It is defined as the affirmative, providing an example of a policy that is an exemplar of the resolution. It's usually not going to be mentioned in the 1AC. It's usually a 1NC argument, i.e. the 1NC is going to be like, hey, we're going to define the word United States. And then they are going to say that it means all three branches of the federal government, both or the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And they will argue that if your plan text doesn't use all three of those agents inside of your plan text, that it would be an untopical AF. And so that is something that's there. Usually you are going to have a pretty good idea of how you're going to answer topicality going into it, but that is one of the stock issues that people like to talk about. Tips when thinking about stock issues. Remember, if a team's making a press about your stock issues, etc., look at the functions of your arguments in your 1AC. Almost always you are going to be making the stock issue arguments that are necessary in order to have a complete argument. They just might not be labeled as such. So look at the functions of arguments being made. Don't look at what it's labeled. And so just kind of remember, it's an old school way of thinking, old school way of debating, and it really just says, hey, did you have all of the parts of a complete argument? And so if you don't look at the labels but look at the functions of arguments, you'll be able to explain why your argument has all the stock issues and you should still vote affirmative. So nothing to be scared of, just something you want to be aware of and kind of know how it operates in case it ever appears inside of a debate.